Hey guys, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. Today we're going to be talking about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and since I didn't get to do a review for the first episode last week, like my breakdowns that I was doing, this video is going to be kind of a combination of episode 1, for the most part kind of focusing on episode 2, but I will talk a little bit about episode 1 where I didn't put up a video last week. So just wanted to give you guys that kind of heads up. This will have, spoilers in it, so if you haven't seen the first 2 episodes, make sure you watch those and then come back and check this video out. Or as always, if you don't care, continue watching. But without further ado, let's go ahead and talk some Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
15 seconds to drop. So what's our plan? Great.
So with episode 1, we got introduced to kind of see what was going on with the soldiers of, Sam Wilson and Bucky in this episode. In the beginning, I actually, and as I saw quite a few people kind of thought that it was maybe going to start off with seeing Captain America's funeral, and I was like, oh shit, I guess they might actually go in this direction, but that wasn't the case. We do actually get to see a pretty sweet action piece with the Falcon, and he's going after this group called LAF. We get to see a sweet action set piece there, and then we also get introduced to this character whose name is Torres, and he's kind of helping out Sam Wilson. And I guess, because I'm not as familiar with some of these characters, but I looked it up, and some people actually kind of think that Torres because there is, I guess, in the comics, is a character who takes over as the Falcon, and that might be the case here if Sam ends up taking over eventually the mantle of Captain America down the line. So that was cool that they introduced him, see what happens with his character. He is in both the episodes, so definitely I think they might have bigger plans for him down the road. In the first episode, too, we actually also got introduced to the group of the Flag Smashers, which is basically a group of people that believe that life was actually better during the blip, and so they're kind of trying to make life go back to kind of how it was during that time. So interesting group of people. I'm not really familiar as if they're someone who was in the comics. I don't believe so, but curious to see kind of we start seeing more about them kind of in episode 2, see what they're all about. And then right after that, we ended up getting to see Sam. He actually ends up donating Captain America's shield to this museum, and we end up seeing, we get a cameo from Rhodey there, and he's just kind of hey, are you sure you want to do this? And he has an interesting line where he says our allies are our enemies now. And so I'm thinking, and I've seen other people mention it too, was that a reference to Wanda, where this takes place after WandaVision? So that's what I'm kind of thinking as far as that goes. And it could mean some other people as well, but I think that's kind of what they were referencing there. We got to see a flashback sequence with Bucky, where he was the Winter Soldier, and he was taking out different people, and he ends up taking out this one guy who's he's at this museum or whatever, and he ends up shooting him point blank. After that, he wakes up, and we end up finding out that Bucky has actually he's in a therapy session, and that's kind of part of what he has to do in order to make amends for all of the crimes and stuff that he committed in the past when he was part of Hydra. So that's really interesting. You can see that he's definitely dealing with a lot of shit. He's been alive for over 100 years now, and he's trying to make amends, and so he's dealing with all this kind of previous pain and stuff that goes. And he actually has a list that we see later on, and on that list, if you guys notice, you actually see Zemo is on there, and we'll talk more about him in a second as we get into the episode 2. But he's basically going through and trying to make amends for all the people that he kind of screwed over or put into power because of what he was doing with Hydra, and just kind of clearing up past sins. And with Bucky, at one point in the episode, we end up finding out that he's become friends with this older gentleman, and at one point they go to a restaurant, they're having they're having dinner, and we end up finding out that this guy's his son died. And later on in the episode, we find out that that was actually the guy that Bucky ended up shooting. And it's so I'm sure at some point in the show, I don't know if it's going to be next episode, episode 3 or 4, we're definitely going to have that confrontation. And that's going to be really shitty because obviously Bucky knows, he's yeah, that was, obviously he knows that was him that did that. So that really, really sucks. And he's trying to be there for this old man. And you just know that that's going to come out at some point. So it'd be interesting to see like how that situation plays out. Also, in the first episode, we see Sam. He goes to visit like his sister, and sees that she's kind of like struggling. They have like a family business where they have like a boat and stuff like that, and she's been having a hard time paying for this, especially since everything's happened with like the blip and people. Sam was like gone for 5 years, so she's definitely kind of struggling, and she's actually wants to try and sell the ship to make some money. And Sam's like, hey, we can't do that. That's part of like our family like heritage. We gotta do whatever we can to basically keep this thing. And they end up going to try and get a loan basically, and find out that they're not able to get one. And they're like, oh, well, like, don't you have like money, Falcon? You were part of like the Avengers. I imagine like Tony Stark was paying you, all this money. And we realized that that wasn't the case. And just like the whole fact that they weren't able to get like a loan, this show, it's really different compared to, in a way, it's different to WandaVision, where WandaVision kind of had like the magic and stuff like that, and the bending of like reality, but it does deal with real world struggles, like as people go through like depression and grief and stuff like that. But this is dealing with a lot of other like real world issues, and so that was really cool. And they tackle more of that too in episode 2. But that was like a really interesting scene to me, just seeing that all play out. And then the guy's like, when he like realizes who he is, he's like, oh, like, hey, can I get like a selfie with you? And Sam's just kind of like, are you joking? I was like, anybody like kind of would in that like kind of situation. It's kind of fucked up. And towards like the end of the episode, we end up, we see the Flag Smashers again, because that Torres, he's basically trying to infiltrate them, and we find out that they do indeed have like super strength, and we'll talk about that more in like a second. So see a little bit more about the Flag Smashers, and then at the very end of the episode, we get the introduction of the new Captain America. And I remember like watching like the ending of that, and I was just like, wow, that is like the Captain America of like when you go to like you order something like off Wish and it comes in, that's like your Captain America basically that you got, like the way his mask looked and everything. And I know they were going for that, I'm pretty sure, like on purpose, but it was pretty funny. But you could just see Sam and Bucky's like, or Bucky and Sam's reaction, and they were just like, oh my god, like what is this? So that's pretty much like episode 1, kind of like broken down really quickly. Like I said, I didn't get a chance to do it last week, so I wanted to just talk a little bit about it here in this breakdown. And now we'll go ahead and talk about episode 2. So episode 2 opens up, and we get to see John Walker, and he's actually in his, his former like high school, and he's getting ready to go out and do like an interview. And you see like the suit and everything like that, and he's kind of like trying to, you can tell that he's really nervous about going out there and everything. And his, I believe it's either wife or like girlfriend, she comes in, because I'm not super familiar with some of these characters in this show as I was with like WandaVision. So she comes in and she's talking to him, and you can just tell that he's nervous, and he just like he tells her, and he talks to like one of his friends that comes in like afterwards, and just says like how he doesn't want to disappoint people because he knows the mantle of Captain America is a big deal. And that's one of the things that I really liked with episode 2, is that because at the end of episode 1, everyone online was kind of like, who the hell is this guy? Like, this guy is not Captain America. So I actually think that they did a really good job of actually kind of humanizing and making, us kind of care about this character and see that, he knows that this is a big deal. He isn't just being like, oh yeah, like I'm Captain America and like no one's gonna like notice, So I think that's one of the things that I really liked about this episode, is that a lot of people are kind of, divided on if they like this guy or if they still like hate him. So definitely bravo to Marvel as far as like that goes. And we can see, the reaction from Bucky and Sam. They can see, like, from where they are, they see this guy, he's doing his, like, interview with Good Morning America, and you can just see that, the introduction of him taking the mantle of Captain America is really, tearing them both kind of, like, apart for their own, like, reasons. And then Bucky, we finally get to see him, meet up with Sam, as they haven't talked to each other for like a little bit now. And he meets up with them and he's like, hey, like, why did you give up the shield? And then we kind of get the beginning of what I think is going to go throughout the rest of the show. We get some really good, banter back and forth between these characters. And I loved their conversation when Sam, brings up like the big three, because he starts talking about how he's dealing with the Flag Smashers and stuff like that, and brings that up to Bucky. And he's like, yeah, they might be part of the big three, and that's aliens, androids, and wizards. And that whole conversation, that was amazing. And so I really like the banter back and forth between those characters. That is hilarious. So Bucky, he ends up, after their little conversation, he ends up going with Sam, because Sam's trying to track down, the Flag Smashers and kind of find out what's going on with them. So he ends up following them, to go track these guys down. And that's when we get the sweet action scene, which we got in like one of the trailers, where you see the Flag Smashers, basically they're facing off against Bucky and Sam on top of like the trucks and stuff like that. So that was really cool. And as they're fighting, then we get to see John Walker and his friend, they join in and, start going like head to head with these guys. And we get some, a pretty sweet like overall like action sequence with that. The Flag Smashers end up, getting away. And after that, John Walker is trying to basically convince, Sam and Bucky to join up with them. They're talking, and Bucky, finally he has it when John's friend, he's like, yeah, my name's Battlestar, which I guess is a character from the comics. Like I said, I've been doing some research, looking into some of these characters. So he is a character from the comics. And like when he says that, Bucky, that just like throws him off. He's like, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. And he gets off like the vehicle. And then like John and Sam, they're talking like a little bit more, and then he kind of gives this like backhanded like compliment to Sam, where he's like talking about Captain America's like wingman, and it's just like, yeah, that was kind of a dick move, dude. So like I said, with this episode, they did a good job of kind of walking that line with that character, where it's like, oh, like you can see like he is like trying to, he's just trying to live up to the best that he can to be the next Captain America. But he says some like dickhead things like throughout the episode, where you're like, damn, dude, I kind of was like rooting for you there, but not anymore. Later on in the episode, we see like the Flag Smashers, after their encounter with Bucky and Sam, they end up going to like this like bunker like area where they're kind of like hiding out. And we find out who like the leader of the Flag Smashers is, or at least what they kind of like make it seem. Her name's like Carly. She's like the girl with like the curly hair that Bucky ended up fighting off. And she ends up getting a text while they're there, and it says like, you took like what was mine, I'm going to kill you. So we find out that there's, some people after them, and it looks like we find out that they're transporting these like different pharmaceuticals and stuff like that in the trucks that they were like, they were bringing over. So someone's definitely like after them. After that, we get a scene where, Bucky's talking to Sam, and, they're on like the airplane, and they're, coming back. And Bucky kind of just like, you get into this conversation where he's like, hey, like, I want to introduce you to someone that, because they bring up like kind of like the super soldiers, because they think that the Flag Smashers are super soldiers. And it's just like, where did these, people like come from? I thought it was only like, you guys. And Bucky's like, oh, there's like someone that you don't know about. So we go to Baltimore, and we end up getting introduced to this character of Isaiah. We find out that this guy was actually a super soldier as well, and he actually faced off against Bucky back in like the 50s. I looked it up, and some people actually think that this character could be the Black Captain America. I guess who's someone who kind of showed up in like the early like 2000s in like the comics and stuff like that. So that'd be pretty cool. I don't know if he's going to be someone that'll show up and like much more in this series, but I could see him playing into a bigger role like in future, whether it's like shows or just like movies and stuff like that. But we'll see. He might very well pop up again. But it was cool to see that there was like another like super soldier, and it was really kind of like sad too. And you could see Sam, he was pissed because this guy, he ended up going to jail, and like they were like, sticking with like needles and testing him and all this, these different things. So he had a really, really, really shitty life. And you can tell the guy just like doesn't want anything to do with that anymore. anymore, like with Hydra and all that, bullshit. He's kind of fed up, and it's like, you don't blame him. So afterwards, they're leaving, and Sam's like, did anyone else like know about him? Like, why didn't you tell me? And they kind of get into this confrontation, in the street. And it's not like really like a big deal. Just two guys kind of like, heatedly like talking to each other, but they're in this neighborhood, and the cops show up, and they get out, and it's just like, again, one of those like real life situations that's very relatable to kind of to the climate that's going on, like right now, and has been for like a little while. But they're talking, and these guys, they were both like arguing with each other, but the police get out, and they choose to focus specifically on Sam, and they're like, hey, is this guy, bothering you? And they don't kind of stop until afterwards, like once the other cop, he whispers to the guy, and he's like, oh my God, I didn't realize, you were Falcon. I didn't recognize you without the goggles and stuff like that. And then, you can see Sam, like, he's obviously annoyed, like, as anybody would, because it's like, oh, just because I'm a superhero, like, now you're going to be like, oh, like, sorry, like, I was going after you and stuff like that. So did a really good job, like things like that, I really appreciated in the episode. And then Bucky ends up getting arrested because he missed his therapy appointment. We then end up getting one of my favorite scenes in this episode too, was they end up going to Bucky's like his doctor, and they end up having like a duo like therapy session. And, we get a lot of like the banter of just like, oh, like I wish I didn't have to hear this guy talk and things like that. And that was really funny. But also in this scene right here, we also got a really, nice line of where Bucky was like, if Steve was wrong about you, then he was wrong about me. And it was just like such an impactful line. So like between WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the writing, I think, like so far has been really, really great, with specifically with lines like that. So that scene was definitely like one of my favorites throughout the episode. And it was just like funny, especially when they got like really close to each other, and they were having like the staring contest and stuff like that. So they've done it's only 2 episodes in, but they've done a good job of that back and forth like banter, but they can have like very like serious moments as well. So really good job. I'm really enjoying that so far. And again, after this, we get one more kind of moment where John, Walker is trying to get them to join back up with them. And, Sam Wilson's like, hey, we're kind of like free agents. You guys are kind of restricted. You have to follow certain rules. We don't really kind of have to like do that. So we're going to do our own thing. And John, again, he makes kind of one of those dickheaded, like, he says like kind of a dickheaded thing to say. And he's just like, yeah, he's like, well, you know what, then just like stay the hell out of my way or whatever. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that character. Again, if you guys are familiar with the character, I'd love to hear kind of maybe like what they might kind of do with him. Because I know that he's like, could be like U.S. agent. I don't really know a whole lot about that character's history. So it'd be interesting to see where they take that character for the rest of the series. And then if he's going to be like in any future like projects like as well. But that's kind of the last that we see him here in episode 2. And as the episode, it's kind of starting to wrap up, we see the Flag Smashers again, and they're loading all of like the pharmaceuticals and stuff that they have. They're loading it onto a plane when they get notified that someone, the people that they've been running from are coming after them, and they're going to be there any second. So one of the guys in the group, he gets out and he's like, hey, I'm going to hold them off as long as I can. And he mentions it's the Power Broker, which I wasn't really too familiar with. I ended up like looking up some information about him afterwards. But so he goes to try and like hold them off. He gets like shot and killed, and they take off. And from what I guess I understand with the Power Broker I was reading, he's kind of like this guy who he does like experiments on people and like, gives them like powers, like super soldiers and stuff like that. So I'm assuming it was probably him that actually texted Carly and was like, hey, you took my shit, I want it back or else I'm going to kill you, because that's all of his like drugs and stuff like that. But with him, he does like, I guess he gives people like powers and things like that, but then they kind of like a lot of the experiments like will like go wrong, or the people become like addicted to like the drugs and stuff like that. So they're kind of dependent on this guy. So it seems like he could be kind of like maybe one of the main villains of like this show. That's kind of, I feel like, what they're setting up to be. But again, it's only episode 2. We still got, we got like 4 more episodes to go. So I guess we'll see. But that kind of seems like where they might be going as far as that goes. But then at the very end of the episode, we see Sam and Bucky, they're talking, and Bucky, he brings up like talking to like Isaiah and refers to like Hydra. and he's like, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna have to go visit, Zemo. But Sam's just like no, like you can't like go like visit that guy. You can't be serious, go sit in the same room with him because of what happened with their past, Civil War and stuff like that. And then the ending of the episode, we actually get to see Zemo in like his like room at like this like prison or whatever. So obviously in episode 3 we're going to be actually getting to see Zemo. If you've seen like the trailers and stuff like that, he gets out like at like some point or whatever, because we see his mask and stuff like that. So he's definitely going to play a bigger part, I think, in the rest of the season or like the series like as well. So it'd be interesting to see kind of how he's tied into like all this stuff. But yeah, they kind of have, they have like Zemo's like a villain, or I assume he's going to be a villain. The Power Broker. We got the Flag Smashers. Like I think they're kind of one of those like people where it's like they're kind of like a villain, but in a way, like not really. So they kind of like walk that like gray line. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with them. But I really, really liked, episode 2. Again, it's been really nice to kind of get a more detailed look at these characters of, Falcon and the Winter Soldier and kind of what they've been up to, after the blip situation and stuff like that. And really just getting to focus more on these characters that weren't really, first like tier like characters in the Marvel universe. So it's been really nice to kind of get to know a little bit more about them and just like how they're reacting to the whole situation and Steve and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I've been really, really enjoying it. I can't wait to see, what else we have in the rest of this series. And I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are. So definitely let me know down below in the comments, what did you think of episodes 1 and 2 of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier? How do you, for those who have watched both the series, like, do you like WandaVision more or to start off, or do you like, Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Because I don't know, there's definitely going to be, 2 different camps as far as that goes. I myself, I like both of them. I think I like WandaVision, at least to start off, a little bit more so far, but I know Falcon and the Winter Soldier is kind of the more typical, like, MCU, so I feel like some people might like this a little bit more. So I definitely want to hear your thoughts down below. Please give this video a thumbs up, as it really helps with the YouTube algorithm. I tell you guys like all the time, but again, it really, really helps it out where I am a smaller channel. And if you guys are new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button as well as the bell button next to it, just so that way you get notifications for all my new videos. I'm going to try and do reviews for this series as well, so keep checking back for that. And as always, guys, please make sure to check back for more Pop Culture with Pat.